The voice of sharing Durian ASEAN.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Good morning and welcome to Durian ASEAN. Yo, with Gowri here today on your ASEAN Daily, only on Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing. And of course, I'm here today to bring you news from all over Southeast Asia. And to kick off our news for this morning, we have the news from Indonesia, where Indonesia considers national emergency over forest fires. And it's about time for that, isn't it? Indonesia has been considering whether or not to declare a national emergency over fires that has been, of course, smoldering across the archipelago for weeks, sending haze drifting across much of Southeast Asia. Recently, it has also been plaguing southern Philippines and even southern Thailand, starting to feel the smog. And after so long, a lot of deliberation that's been happening among the ministers in Indonesia. A lot of times they were not sure whether or not to declare the haze as a national emergency for a few reasons. And starting with one particular reason, where, according to the statement, it said that they did not want to declare national emergency because if they do that, then they will have to pay for all the damages caused. All the damages caused by these big companies. But at the same time, if they keep pointing fingers at each other and neither party wants to take responsibility for this, and then at the end of the day, no one is accountable for the haze. And I think as the government of Indonesia, as much as they want these companies to be held accountable for their actions, they have to be the first to react and declare a national emergency because the PSI level is insane. It's already beyond thousands, and that is crazy. The air looks yellow. People can barely see where they're walking, and at a time like this, it's not exactly wise for the government to be deliberating on whether or not we should pay for this, or should we let these big MNCs pay for this because they have banks in London, in Singapore, pretty much everywhere. If they really want to hold these big companies accountable, the best way to do it is actually to have the proper regulations, come up with harsher measures, harsher punishments for anyone who still practices open burning in Indonesia, and anyone who does not follow the already given law in Indonesia. And it seems that the problem is too big, definitely, and the government would intensify their efforts to contain the fires that have caused the pollutions across the region. Of course, they have schools closed, flights cancelled, and this has cost Indonesia billions of dollars in damages. And President Joko Widodo is expected to make the decision on the emergency after returning from the United States. So it seems like it's still in discussion, very much still deliberating. They're not 100% sure, but it seems that they are leaning more towards declaring national emergency. So that is definitely a good step. And according to Vice President Yusuf Kala, he said that President Jokowi will be more focused on domestic problems. When asked about President Jokowi's visit to to the United States, and he even cancelled his visit to the Silicon Valley, where he was expected to discuss investment deals with Apple and Google executives. And recently, also the haze has spread to places like Papua, as the El Nino weather phenomenon has been further encouraged by the dry season, and it has hampered the firefighting efforts. And he added that there were concerns about business, of course, and these businesses could use government action to declare force a measure on deals in sectors ranging from palm oil to banking. Of course, palm oil is the biggest culprit here, but it's not exactly the palm oil's fault. It's the people who try to harvest this palm oil who are not exactly doing it in a sustainable way. And according to Kala, he also said that 40 million Indonesians in 5 provinces have been affected by the haze. The National Disaster Agency said on Monday that haze was starting to spread south towards the Java Island, where over half of the country's population lives. And the last time the country declared a national emergency was when the Indian Ocean tsunami killed more than 100,000 people in 2004. So let's wait for President Jokowi to come back, and we'll see what he has to say, and we'll find out whether or not it's going to be a national emergency in Indonesia. And also a very positive news from Malaysia in terms of the palm oil industry, and also all the companies in Indonesia which are owned by Malaysian counterparts. It seems that Malaysia is urging Indonesia not to make any compromises when it comes to charging these companies, taking action against these companies which carry out forest fires. Malaysia has urged Indonesian companies to also take stern actions against any companies that is found guilty of carrying out forest fires and also burning the estates resulting in the haze. This was said by our Minister of Natural Resources and Environment, Datuk Seri Dr. Wan Junaidi Tuanku Jaafar, said Malaysia's stand is pretty clear. It would not side with any Malaysian company which is committing offences and is not following the law in another country, and in this case being Indonesia. And Malaysian companies which operate here are subject to Indonesian law, speaking about Indonesia. And so it is up to the government of Indonesia to really decide what is the appropriate action to take on these companies if they are found guilty, he told reporters after attending a meeting with several members of the Dewan Perwakilan Rakyat. And the Malaysian delegation was led by the Minister of Federal Territories, Datuk Seri Tengku Adnan Tengku Mansor, on a one-day working visit to Jakarta today as a special representative to the Malaysian cabinet. And this is to discuss the problem of the haze. And it seems that this problem has been going on for quite some time, and we have countries urging each other. I really hope that they start taking some actions, and it will not just be meetings after meetings, and at the end of the day, sometime next year, we are faced with the same problem, which is the haze. And the local media also reported recently that Indonesian authorities have identified so far 5 Malaysian-owned estates believed to be involved in the burning of forest and agricultural areas in the country as a replanting method. So I would like to highlight 2 things here. One is all these Malaysian companies that are in Indonesia right now and not quite following the law as it is in Indonesia. And not only are they breaking the law, they are also contributing to the haze, which is causing a major problem, not just health problems, economic problems as well, because that is deterring a lot of tourists from coming into the country. I think even local businesses are not able to operate all the shops by the streets, especially any shop that is outdoors. And another thing is the awareness level when it comes to using products with palm oil in them. I think that, when there is demand, there will be supply. So going back to these Malaysian-owned companies, of course, they need the palm oil to actually produce their product, but do it in a sustainable way. Don't do it in a way that you contribute to one of the worst national disasters in Southeast Asia. And I think people, as consumers, need to be more aware as well as to the type of products that they're using, and making sure that they only purchase, as much as difficult as this sounds, just to be a bit more careful, a bit more picky about your products, and try to make sure that you only purchase from companies that actually harvest palm oil in a sustainable manner. And from Indonesia, let's move on to Myanmar right now, where fears of religious violence grow as Myanmar elections approach, and the residents of Meiktila particularly are becoming increasingly nervous over fears that the elections may prompt another bout of sectarian violence that gripped the area 2 years ago. As many grow more and more excited with Myanmar's polling day approaching very close by on the 8th of November, others are actually becoming increasingly nervous over fears that the elections may prompt another bout of violence. And one of the concerned citizens who said that he grieves because he could not protect his 59-year-old father who was killed by Buddhist mobs in 2013. Because he was Muslim, and apparently he's the only son, and he only has his father, and whenever he talks about his father's death, it still feels like the incident happened only yesterday, said Aung, who is a Muslim taxi driver. And apparently the way they murdered his father was very brutal. They dragged him on the ground, killed him with a knife, and even burnt alive. And because of that, this election does not even really concern Mr. Aung, who is more worried about his other family's livelihood. The election is coming, but whoever becomes president, all we want is to live peacefully and be able to work freely for our livelihood. I think this is another big issue in Southeast Asia when it comes to the Muslim community in Myanmar, how they are sidelined, they are marginalized, and most of them are not even being treated as humans from a country with a Buddhist majority. And another local who, together with other Buddhists, convinced the attackers to stay away from the Muslim quarters by distracting them, pretending to destroy some small Muslim shops and houses. And they also told the Muslim people that they need to hide for a while. But that shouldn't be the way, especially for a country that is having an upcoming elections where they're heading towards democracy, and they cannot even live together with their Muslim counterparts, that the Muslim community in Myanmar actually have to run and hide in order to protect themselves from the Buddhist majority. Of course, not all of them. We're talking about these few groups who resort to religious extremism. And such an assurance is encouraging for the 12-year-old, another citizen who is still haunted by the communal violence which happened more than 2 years ago. Although she's still too young to vote now, she's not too young to worry about the potential problems that these elections might trigger. And the area looks calm now, but back in March 2013, actually, in this village, about 20 Muslim villagers had to flee for their lives because of the sectarian violence, which killed at least 40 people. And due to the violent incident, some Muslim villagers have not even decided if they actually want to cast their ballots on polling day. So it's not so much about them not being able to make a decision, and it's not also about them not knowing which direction that they want the country to head into. It's something very simple as them fearing for their lives, that if they go out and they get caught in some violent incident, will they make it back home alive? And will this election actually cost them their lives? And some would actually feel that it doesn't really matter which candidate gets elected if they continue to face the same discrimination over and over again and remain shunned by some Buddhist communities in Myanmar. And I could not agree more with them. There's no point having an election and electing a new leader, trying to have this whole reform process, which is getting a lot of attention right now, if at the end of the day, when somebody takes over, things are still going to remain the same. Those who are poor remain poor, those who are marginalized remain marginalized, and those who are not being treated like humans still continue that way. And many people in Myanmar, though, do have very high aspirations for a democratic government that could be achieved in the coming election. And one of them is Kyo Lin Oo, who is an executive director for the Myanmar People Forum Working Group, a civil society organization. And she said that actually this is the first time in her life that she had to vote for an election, and every citizen has the right to vote. They didn't vote in 2010 because she was in Thailand, but it's very important that they do it now based on the calculations that's been done, who should be in the ruling party and who should be the representative of the constituency. Everyone has to do their own calculations and figure out what will be the best for the future of the country. And in the elections, every citizen above 18 years old needs to vote, and the quality of this vote will change the entire country's future. Bring it to a whole other political period, and that's why every vote is important. I would definitely urge everyone in Myanmar to go out and vote, because that's the only way that you can do your part to make a difference. Of course, we are also trying our best. A lot of people are working hard to go to Myanmar and highlight the plight of the marginalized community, which is the Rohingya, or most of the Muslim communities in Myanmar. But at the same time, you need to do your part as well. As risky as it is, you need to go out there and cast your vote. Make sure that someone who is reasonable enough, someone who practices moderation, gets elected instead, so the Muslim community will not be marginalized in the future, hopefully. And moving on to Cambodia now, they are experiencing some new violence against the opposition. So what happened was there was a well-organized, a very brutal assault on two opposition members of the National Assembly, which happened on the 26th of October, according to Human Rights Watch. And they are calling out to the United Nations Human Rights Office in Cambodia to investigate this matter. And apparently on the early morning of October 26th, several 100,000 protesters gathered outside the Cambodia National Assembly building in Phnom Penh to demand the removal of Kem Sokha, who is the deputy leader of opposition of Cambodia National Rescue Party, from his post as first vice chairman. And the protesters also assaulted two CNRP parliamentarians, dragging them from their cars as they attempted to leave the area, and then beating and stomping on them, inflicting some serious injuries. And it seems like they are using this mob attack approach to send a message to members of the parliament, also sending them a signal that Cambodians are ready for a new wave of political era, but it also signals a new wave of political violence that can be unleashed anytime and pretty much anywhere. And according to Brad Adams, the Asia director, he said that this ugly incident is the same kind of crude political violence used against the opposition back in the 1990s to fend off challenges to Hun Sen's one-party rule. So looks like Cambodia is also kind of suffering from a one-party rule, where in Myanmar we have the military rule taking over, and what they actually call the elections of 2013 the fraud-ridden elections. And Prime Minister Hun Sen has repeatedly warned opposition to expect demonstrations against it. And he also said very recently in an opposition victory in the next election could actually lead to a civil war, and warned CNRP President Sam Rainsy that he is at risk of being jailed. Looks like Cambodia is nowhere interested in heading towards a democratic country, or heading towards a democratic direction. And President Hun Sen is still very much in power, and the Cambodia opposition party should be more careful and try to fight back, not in a violent way, but show them that you cannot be suppressed, that in the country there has to be a healthy opposition party, and it will not be ruled by a one-man party, and you will not tell the people what to do or who to bow to. And from there, let's move on to what's happening in Philippines at the moment. Nope, we are not talking about the elections, although the elections in Philippines are also upcoming. Lots and lots of interesting candidates. But this is about U.S. sea patrols, which are making rounds in the west Philippines Sea. And this was said by President Aquino himself on Tuesday. He sees nothing wrong with Washington's sending of a warship close to the artificial islands of China. And the move prompted Beijing actually to furiously denounce what it called a threat to its sovereignty. And the USS Lassen, a guided missile destroyer, passed within 12 nautical miles the normal limit of territorial waters around natural land of Zamora, which Beijing claims in the Calayan island group. And Vice Admiral Alexander Lopez, commander of the Philippine Military Western Command, told the Manila Times that a surveillance aircraft was dispatched to survey the lanes where the USS Lassen was expected to pass, but said visibility was quite poor in the area. And according to President Aquino, of course, he said this is no big deal. This is not an issue at all because we know that the Philippines have a very, very good relationship with the U.S., that they even have their own base camp right now, and therefore he doesn't see any issue for the U.S. Navy ship traversing under international law in waters. It should be free to be traveled upon by any country, so long as everybody conforms to the established international rules and laws. But China's foreign minister spokesman Lu Kang said the ship illegally entered the waters near the island without receiving permission from the Chinese government. And Beijing resolutely opposes any country using the freedom of navigation and overflight as a pretext for harming China's national sovereignty and security interests. And I think China is just being a tad hypocritical right here. Because for months they have been having disputes with Philippines, with Vietnam as well, slowly inching into their territorial waters and building artificial islands and placing their ships as well. And every time we try to call for a dialogue, it always seems like they being quite difficult, asking for only bilateral resolutions, and they don't want to do it on a big scale on an ASEAN level. But it seems that when just a U.S. warship passing by, they feel so threatened and they feel like it's challenging their own sovereignty. And well, China, if you don't want anyone stepping on your toe, you need to stop stepping on other people's toes as well. And of course, ASEAN itself does have a very important relationship with China, and we don't want to jeopardize that. But I think that maybe China doesn't really have to overreact so much, because at the end of the day, Philippines and the U.S. do have a good relationship, and I don't think that they are interested in taking over China anytime soon. So we'll take a short break. When we come back, let's move on to the economy side of Southeast Asia.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Hello and welcome back to Durian ASEAN. You're with Gowri here on your ASEAN Daily, where we bring you news from all over Southeast Asia, only on DurianASEAN.com, the voice of discovery and sharing. And we're talking about Vietnam for this half of the show, where Vietnam is strengthening their relationship with Latin America. And of course, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam has held very close relations with Cuba since the 1960s and is working with Venezuela right now on various social projects. Vietnam is strengthening its ties with Latin America this week after holding meetings with officials from both Venezuela and Cuba to discuss areas they hold in common. And the meeting started on Monday in Venezuela, where the Minister for Habitat and Housing, Manuel Quevedo, met with the ambassador to the Socialist Republic of Vietnam in Caracas. And among some of the things that the two parties discussed was housing, industrialization, and other social projects. according to the Venezuelan state media. And right now, we are giving much importance to the part of social projects because in Vietnam, you have a lot of technology that can help in the industrial part. Vietnam is a great friend. President Nicolas Maduro has every intention of strengthening all commercial ties and develop them, according to Quevedo, who is the Minister for Habitat and Housing. Venezuelan official also promised to carefully review the social and housing projects in Vietnam to see what it can actually learn from the Asian countries' tactics. Because although poverty is a major issue in the country, Vietnam has actually succeeded in drastically reducing poverty levels in the past 2 decades, going back to as early as the 1990s, where poverty levels were at 60%. Today, it only stands at 20%. And this Venezuelan minister also took time to speak about its country's housing mission, which includes the construction of 3 million homes, while officials from Vietnam also traveled to Cuba on Monday to reinforce its military relations. These two countries have held a close bilateral relationship since the 1960s and are considered close economic and political allies, according to the Cuban media. And they met this week in order to develop and make more efficient and mutual relations in the military field, said the Vietnamese general. Very interesting efforts here by Vietnam while they're going to Venezuela, exchanging tips on how to do housing in the country, exchanging tips on how to reduce poverty, and then they're also going to Cuba to see how they can strengthen their military power. I think Vietnam is definitely one country to look out for in Southeast Asia. They're also forming a lot of partnership, signing a lot of deals with China as well because of the close proximity, and they might just be the next up and coming country to look out for in Southeast Asia. And speaking of a country to look out for, of course, you cannot talk about it without mentioning Singapore. And Singapore's economy is predicted to expand at a modest pace for 2015-2016. This is according to the Monetary Authority of Singapore, who also said that the external environment is likely to remain challenging, and investment into the digital revolution, such as ICT, hardware, software, and R&D, they're all expected to be the key driver of economic activity in the future. And Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS, also said that a lot of this external environment will definitely remain challenging. While the U.S. economy has gained some traction, it warns that strength of the recovery may not really filter down as strongly to import demand around this time. And it also adds that the region will also face challenges arising from China's slowdown and tighter external financing conditions. Looking ahead, MAS said that oil trading should remain buoyant with arbitrage opportunities in the market expected to persist in the months ahead, keeping demand for cheaper crude oil strong. And this new economic frontier that Singapore is facing right now is also, they're calling it the rise of technology and innovation, because Singapore stands to benefit from the increased trade in high-tech, high-value goods and services, as it contributes to the growth in Asia as a production base for high-tech products. And apart from that, they have also been investing a lot in digital revolutions, such as the ICT, hardware, software, and R&D, like I mentioned a little earlier. And given the crucial role of intellectual capital, speaking of the next phase of development for Singapore, MAS said that the labor force will actually need an approximate mix of relevant technical expertise as soft skills in order to meet the demands of these industries. So if you're all techy and geeky, you know where to go. Singapore is the place to be. They're definitely growing in that area, and they're looking for more people as well to contribute to the sector. And and to work more in terms of technology and innovation. And apart from that, it seems that inflation is also expected to be subdued in 2015 but should rise in 2016. And another thing that they're looking at is wage pressures that will persist, but I will not go too deep into that. Must mention that unit cost labor actually rose at a fairly rapid pace of 5.2% the first half of 2015, following 4% increase in the previous quarter. So that's the case with Singapore at the moment, where they are expected to expand, but at a very modest pace in 2016. Well, even then, Singapore is already well ahead of most of us in the region. And technology is also something that we need to really start investing in, because, well, everything goes back to internet and technology these days. So on that note, we'll take another break. When we come back, I'll bring you some news from the arts and culture side of Southeast Asia.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Hello and welcome back to Duran ASEAN. You're with Gowri here on your ASEAN Daily, where we bring you news from all over Southeast Asia. For this last part of the discussion, we'll talk about the arts and culture side of Southeast Asia. And talking about Vietnam still, ASEAN Environment Meeting opens in Hanoi, looking at a green community. And Vietnam is apparently hosting the 13th ASEAN Ministerial Meeting, which kicked off in Hanoi on Monday, focusing on creating a green and clean ASEAN community. And this meeting, which is called the AMME 13, and other related meetings, will actually last until Friday, and they are all significant. Of significant importance, as the formation of ASEAN community is drawing very, very near. That's right. We are already heading into November right now as we speak. And ASEAN has also built the ASEAN Vision 2015, which defines the goal for a green and clean ASEAN community, which with etiquette mechanisms serving sustainable development in order to ensure environmental protection in the region, and the sustainability of natural resources and high life quality of each citizen. It seems that the ASEAN environment ministers have adopted an ASEAN sort of an action plan on environmental education for the 2014 to 2018 period, mostly focusing on promoting sustainable development via education. And I think they're also looking at increasing public engagement in environmental issues. I think that's the most effective way to do it when it comes to promoting any sort of cause. The best way to do it is actually through public engagement. When you get people to just read it or watch it, they might forget about it. But if they actually participate in it, there is some engagement, some interaction. It makes them participate in some activities. That's when they tend to remember it, and they also tend to appreciate it better. And an ASEAN Regional Center for Biodiversity Conservation has also been set up with financial support from the European Union, who is also helping out ASEAN. Of course, we are also executing a working plan to carry out the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution. And the environment ministers have agreed to submit a proposal on haze supervision mechanism to ASEAN leaders for approval. And the AMME is actually held once every 3 years on a rotary basis among ASEAN countries to devise the bloc's strategy and policies on cooperation when it comes to environment-related issues. And just a fun fact, the first AMME was organized in Philippines on April 30th in 1981. And from there, well, let's see. Who is helping ASEAN cope with aging? Do you want to take a guess? It's Japan. So Japan government has been planning to launch a private public consultation mechanism with ASEAN next year to help member nations cope with their aging population, according to sources. And the aging of Japan's population has proceeded in that in ASEAN member nations. So the project actually aims to use the nation's experience in handling the growing trend. A lot of government officials and experts from Japan, as well as ASEAN nations, are also expected to join this consultation mechanism to discuss issues related to nursing care services in each countries. I think what they're doing here is Japan and ASEAN coming together to see how they can effectively take care and handle the aging population in their respective countries. And Japan, this is not the first time, of course, that Japan is helping out ASEAN. They've also helped us before when it comes to introducing high-performance care beds to Singapore and Brunei. And they also provided a lot of instructions and trainings in nursing care programs involving an entire local community in Malaysia. And there's a very high demand expected from ASEAN countries for future beds, diapers, and other medical and nursing care products made in Japan, as well as nursing care robots. And that will be all from me this morning. Thank you so much for listening to the news commentary. And, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's where you get all the daily podcast for news commentary as well as our daily interviews. Yes, we interview someone new from Mondays to Fridays every day at 9 a.m. So tune into that one. Today will be all about startups and how to be your own boss. So stay tuned for later at 9 o'clock. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow as well at 8 o'clock for a brand new show on the ASEAN Daily. So this is Gowri. I'll see you tomorrow.